Okay, so we're going into behavior now, and I'm trying to cut this down as small as I possibly can. So what I'm trying to do is give you guys examples as much as possible so that, remember, College Board wants you to know an example really well so that if I ask you about it, you can use that example for anything like cell communication pathway or examples of hormones that act to, for whatever reason or whatever. Um, so I'm giving you examples, but please understand that what I'm giving you here in this presentation and in the next one are not exhaustive lists, and there's a lot out there, and you could always find something else if you want to. But just in the interest of time, so that you're not constantly taking notes, I'm trying to cut things down as much as possible. All right, so we're going to focus on plants and behavior first in this first lesson, because that's what we're going to do in class first. And then the next lesson will focus on animal behavior, and that one might be a bit longer. All right, so let's start with the fact that plants do not have a nervous system. Okay, I know that seems like a big duh, but when you think about it, then if a plant is going to have any kind of directed response, it's kind of amazing that they're able to do that. And we don't think of plants as having directed responses to stimuli, but they do actually respond to stimuli. And all of their responses are carried out through signal transduction pathways using hormones. Okay. So just to give you an example of a few kinds of hormones and what they do, and some of these I think we talked about in baby bio. Auxins are kind of the growth hormone in plant. They cause cells to grow upward, not outward for the most part, although they can if they're produced in a side stem. They can hold on to fruit, help the plant to hold its fruit onto the plant until it's ripened and ready to go. Gibberellins are more like a sex hormone in plant. They can cause seed germination and growth of seedling, but they also promote flowering. And remember, flowering is how the flowering plants actually carry out sexual reproduction. They also increase the fruit size. And then there is a gaseous hormone called ethylene, and it is clear, it is odorless, but its job is to ripen fruit. And it's actually produced by the fruits even after they are removed from the plant. It's why your bananas all ripen at the same time, right? They're in a bunch, they're all together. And as they produce ethylene, that causes them to ripen. And the thing about ethylene is the more ripe the fruit is, the more ethylene it produces, which means it causes the fruit to ripen even more. The more it ripens, more ethylene causes more ripening, and it's just a big cycle, right? In terms of ethylene production, different fruits produce different amounts of ethylene. So pears, if you've ever tried to ripen pears, you know pears are kind of jerks, right? You buy pears, you're looking forward to pears, and the pears will sit on that counter for weeks on end sometimes before they actually ripen. And it's because they just don't produce as much ethylene. If you want to ripen your pears faster, you put them in a paper bag and you put a banana in the paper bag and you kind of just fold the top over and you check them every single day, because bananas produce a whole lot of ethylene. And so that ethylene from the banana is released into the bag, and that in turn will ripen the pears. Okay, so that's ethylene. Abscisic acid, or ABA, is a hormone that promotes dormancy. So abscission is when the leaves fall off of the trees, when the trees become dormant in the winter time. So ABA is going to basically shut the tree down or the plant down for the winter time. So it'll cause leaves to drop off, right? It stops growth, and it will literally block the effectiveness of all other hormones. Okay, so those are examples of how plants will respond to their environment or using these hormones, right? So when things are in good supply, like sunlight and food and water and things like that, they'll produce these auxins and gibberellins. When a fruit is released from the tree or usually tree, it's gonna fall off. And the whole point of fruit, remember, is to carry the seed, right? And so the seed can't get out of the fruit and start growing if the fruit doesn't ripen and start to rot away or get eaten by an animal and carried away. So, ripening is an important process for fruit. And then, of course, in response to lessening light in the fall and colder temperatures, plants start producing abscisic acid. So these are what control plant responses. So here are some responses. There are basically two categories of responses in plants. Tropisms are growth in response to a stimulus, and nastic movements are actual movements of the plant in response to a stimulus. So phototropism is growth toward light. And by the way, a tropism is positive if the plant grows in the direction of the stimulus. It's negative if it grows away from the stimulus. So plants always exhibit positive phototropism in their stems, right? The stems will grow toward light. That makes sense, right? Because plants want to grow and put their leaves out closest to a light source so they can absorb the maximum amount of light to do photosynthesis. The way that this works is that auxin accumulates on the dark side of a plant stem. So if you've ever you brought a plant in from outside in the wintertime and you've stuck it in a window so it can still get light. If you don't turn that plant periodically, what happens is as the stem continues to grow, auxin accumulates over here on the dark side. The light's coming in the window this way. Here's our plant. And the auxin causes the cells on this side to grow faster than the cells on the light side. And so the stem will bend. Or actually, as it grows up, it grows bent. Okay, it's not straight and then bends. It bends as it grows. Okay. Thigmotropism is a tropism in response to touch. So if you've seen plants that put out tendrils like pea plants or grapevines where they put out those little curly cues that attach to things, that's thigmotropism. Again, it's controlled by auxin. So auxin can accumulate in the side of the tendril that is not touching something to cause that to grow faster so that it grows in a spiral and allows the plant to be anchored. Gravitropism, sometimes known as geotropism, I think, but it's in response to gravity. And this is a little counterintuitive. The part of the plant that has positive gravitropism is the root, not the stem, right? Because the root is growing down into the soil toward the center of the earth, which is where gravity is pulling. The stems actually have negative gravitropism because they're growing upward away from the center of the earth where gravity is pulling. This is because of ameloplasts, which are starch grains that collect in cells. And basically, this works similarly to how the cells in your ears called otoliths work, where those have calcium carbonate crystals inside of them. Here you have these little amelopectin starch grains that are in these cells. And if the plant is tipped forward, then the starch grains that were on the bottom of the cell are now on the front of the cell, and the plant can tell which way it's oriented based on this. And since plants can tell, what literally happens if you turn a plant upside down and anchor it so that it's not going to fall out of its pot, the stem is growing down, but then the stem will actually turn and start to grow up, and the roots that were growing up will actually turn and start to grow down as well, which is why those topsy-turvy things that you see sold in stores don't work. They work temporarily, but if you keep the plant tilted upside down, it will start to grow in a different direction. All right. And then you have chemotropism. When a pollen grain lands on top of a flower, on the female parts of the flower, it actually grows in response to hormones. The ovary is down here, the pollen is up here, and this ovary down here is producing hormones. And the sperm cells from the pollen actually, or the pollen itself actually grows down and then releases its sperm into the ovary. Right, so those are tropisms. Now, the thing about tropisms is they're permanent, right? The plant has grown toward or away from a stimulus, right? So you can't unbend the plant stem once the plant has grown in the direction of the light, right? So if that plant has been put in the window and it's not been turned and now it's grown into this crooked shape, You can't ungrow the plant. The only thing you can do is cut the stem back and let it regrow with you turning the plant correctly. Okay, so tropisms are generally permanent. Nastic movements, on the other hand, are quicker movements that are in response to stimuli. And those actually are not permanent, they're reversible. So there's a plant in the North Carolina swamp called the sensitive plant, and it has its leaves kind of out like this. It looks kind of like a mimosa, if you know what a mimosa tree is. And if you run your finger down the center of the leaves kind of and fold up to protect the plant. That's thigmonastic movement. Nyctinastic movement is movement of the plant in response to daily light cycles. So flowering, for example, like morning glories flowering at certain times of day. Also sunflowers tilting in the direction of the sun. Okay, and those, like I said, they're reversible. There's another kind of plant response that has to do with flowering. Obviously, this is only flowering plants, right? Not all plants flower, right? Mosses, ferns, and then the gymnosperms, the pines, things like that don't produce flowers. They produce cones instead. But if you have a flowering plant, it can do something called photoperiodism. And photoperiodism is a plant's flowering response in response to the length of the day and the length of the night. And really what's critical here is the night length. Studies on this have been done in phytotrons, and a phytotron is like a greenhouse on steroids. It's a big metal box and it's shiny inside. Okay. And you can control the light in that box, and the reason why it's shiny inside is that the reflection kind of boosts the power of the light, because it's really, really hard to mimic sunlight in a controlled environment. Just because the sun is so very bright and none of the lights that we can manufacture come close. So that's how they kind of boost the light inside of a phytotron. So you can control the timing of light, the intensity of light, you can control wind, you can control humidity, you can control temperature in one of these things. And what they did was they found that plants that bloom in the fall and winter are known as short day plants, okay? These are plants that require a very long night. And we know that it's the night and not the day that causes flowering, because what they did was they put plants in a phytotron and they grew them under long day, short night conditions, right? No flowering for these kinds of plants. They grew them under conditions where you had a short day but a really long night, and that caused the plant to flower. But then they did something interesting. They said, what if we interrupt the night with just a flash of light? So they ran the normal cycle just like they ran here, but they programmed in a flash of light just in the middle of the night, just a flash. And it turns out the plants could sense it and they did not flower. So that's why this is called a critical night length. The plant has a critical length at which it has to have an uninterrupted nighttime. Okay, so for the short day plants, that critical night length has to surpass, or the time that of darkness, the amount of darkness has to surpass this critical night length line. For the long day plants, instead, the long day plants are the ones that flower in spring and summer, where the daytime is longer. If you give them a long daytime and their critical night, or their length of nighttime is below the critical night length, they will flower. If you extend that nighttime and it's above the critical night length, they won't flower. But if you interrupt the night with a flash like you did before, they flower. Okay, so that's photoperiodism, and it's the response of plants to light. In terms of what controls it, one thing that we know for sure is phytochrome. Okay, and this is a pigment, and it has these two conformations, right? Phytochrome red, or PR, is the inactive form of phytochrome, right? When light hits phytochrome red, the red light in that spectrum converts it to its active form, which is phytochrome far red. So the amount of far red conformation rises during the day. At night, this far red reverts back to the red form, okay? So by comparing the amount of phytochrome far red to phytochrome red, the plants can determine how much light there is shining on the plant. What's not clear is what other mechanism is doing this right now, because the conversion of phytochrome far red to phytochrome red actually is complete within a few hours. So scientists aren't exactly sure how they can sense beyond that what the critical night length is. But this gives us some idea, at least. There's a beginning here.